I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and especially thank you for your patience in us having to run off and do some other business. But we're here, and I appreciate your travels. I'll begin with my opening statement. Good afternoon. The Subcommittee on Interior, Energy, and Environment is meeting today to examine difficulties ranchers with federal grazing permits face, as well as to discuss recommendations to improve cooperation between permittees and our federal land management agencies. Access to public lands is critical for many people, including hikers, hunters, and fishermen. Today, though, we're here to specifically discuss livestock grazing on federal land. As the Western Governors Association says, ranchers are, quote, an important contributor to the customs, cultures, and rural economies of the West, end quote. The Public Lands Council estimates that grazing on federal land contributes at least $1.5 billion to the economy and supports thousands of jobs. In fiscal year 2017, livestock producers held almost 18,000 grazing permits on BLM land and nearly 6,000 active permits on Forest Service land. These operators rely on access to public lands to produce food, wool, and even clothing, as my friend John Helly will be able to discuss later in his testimony. Those are a few of the obvious benefits of responsible utilization of federal land. Both the BLM and Forest Service are charged with managing federal land for multiple use and sustained yield. Ranching, a business that necessitates careful stewardship of natural resources, complements a number of those other uses. Ranchers partner with the state's wildlife agencies, sportsmen's organizations, and conservation groups to facilitate multiple use. Identifying opportunities to promote cooperation on federal land will be an important part of our discussion today. To add additional perspective on this issue, without objection, I'll enter a statement from Gray Thornton, President and CEO of the Wild Sheep Foundation, into the hearing record. I'd like to thank Mr. Thornton for being here today in the audience and the Wild Sheep Foundation for their contribution to our conversation today. Unfortunately, one of the greatest challenges to grazing is special interest litigation and the abuse of some of our core federal environmental protection statutes. While Congress enacted these laws with good intentions, groups that are determined to drive ranchers off the federal land have transformed them into tools to push certain uses over others. This is not what Congress intended, and it certainly does not support the agency's multiple-use missions. Seeking workable solutions and finding common ground becomes that much more difficult when some special interests fundamentally oppose grazing and routinely turn to litigation instead of collaboration. Not only does the constant threat of litigation distract the BLM and Forest Service from their important missions and drain federal resources, but it results in land management decisions driven by fear and apprehension of the next wave of lawsuits. This is no way to manage our rangelands. I know our witnesses today will help further the conversation about preserving opportunities for grazing while ensuring adequate protection of our rangeland and, above all, true multiple-use management. Part of the solution is to ensure our federal grazing permit programs are fair, provide for meaningful permittee participation, and minimize uncertainty and delays. Producers struggle to defend their operations from seemingly endless attacks by well-funded activist organizations who enjoy incentives to litigate under current law. If the BLM and Forest Service continue to operate at the mercy of special interest litigation and ranchers continue to face unnecessary livestock reductions, many ranchers may decide that they can no longer afford to graze on federal land and will be forced to walk away from their business. This would have devastating consequences for local economies and our ranching families who hope to pass their way of life on to the next generation. The bottom line is that we need rangeland management that utilizes sound science, provides for flexibility, and incorporates permittee input. Livestock producers whose livelihoods depend on understanding the local ecosystem develop specialized knowledge through years, and sometimes decades, of on-the-ground experience in cutting them out of the land management process wastes unique expertise and jeopardizes rangeland health. BLM And Forest Service policies should encourage employees to develop productive working relationships with the producers rather than default to restricting access or trying to shield themselves from litigation. Thank you again for our witnesses for joining us today. I look forward to the hearing your testimony on such an important topic. I now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Plaskett, for her